when you scaled, your company scaled from like 900 1,500 doors. We talked a little bit about before the call where, hey, at some point you actually said, hey, let's pause, let's get our stuff together and
Mhm.
get all of our stuff in order so that we can scale even better. Can you help share that story with folks? Like what was going on at the time when you guys were growing so much, and what sort of issues were you guys running into?
Yeah, so, and this was not an easy decision too. Like, it took about 3 or 4 months of us just, for lack of a better word, honestly, pleading with the fund managers of just, "Please stop buying houses." They kept buying. So to explain a little bit of the context, so funds, again, one of the reasons why funds are not the best reason for everybody is once you take the capital, you now have a ticking time bomb, or not a ticking time bomb, but
Mm-hmm.
a clock is now running against you. The second you take that money, you now have to deploy that because you know I'm trying to make this really generalized without making this a thing all about fun. So like there's a couple of different reasons why, but basically as soon as you take that money, you have to either deploy it as rapidly as possible, or if you do take it actually into your bank account, you're going to owe fees on that money and you're owe a return on that investor money, whether you did anything with it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So they were under a very unique set of circumstances where they have to be buying houses, have to be getting that money out into real estate, acquiring their assets, getting things fixed up, getting rent coming in. They have to move very, very fast. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about, or I say it's not for everybody. Like it is a very
Mm-hmm.
high pressure thing, and then plus also you're dealing with people's money. Like they were going after as well institutional money. So that's pension funds, that's teachers union, that's insurance companies. That's like this is people's retirement you're dealing with, and that is a whole different level of pressure and stress and an entirely different world. So he was under a tremendous amount of pressure. And I think it's very important to open this because it's like you have to see it from his perspective before we can get into why it was so difficult. Because everything always has two sides. So he was under a tremendous amount of pressure to, he had your average, it could be somebody who's listening to this, whether you knew it or not, your grandma or your mom or your friends' retirement may have been reliant on this guy performing and this guy buying houses in a timely fashion. So anyway, um, so basically, it took us several months because let's say it's June 4th right now. Okay, let's say he bought 100 houses on May 1st. There were varying conditions, and let's say 80 of them needed rehab, and we were only to get 50 of them done in the month of May. Well, it's now June 1st. Austin, here you go. Here's another 100. Here's another 100 houses. I know you still have 30 houses you haven't finished renovating and aren't tenanted and aren't ready, but you got another 100. So now we're starting going to June with 130 houses, and let's say 100 of them need rehab, and then we're only to get again. Now we're only to get able to get 50 of them done. Now we're going into July with 60 houses needing renovation and another 100 on top of that. So it dug us such a hole that it was really, really hard to get out of. And as well, the other challenge we were going through really too is that so at first, as he was the fund manager, he was doing a very prudent thing where he had a couple of different property managers. He had like three he started out with. I came on, he was basically in the transition of cutting it down to two. And then, 6 months later, he basically then at the end of it, we were the only property manager. So we were basically getting properties from other property management companies who weren't doing their job or probably were drowning just as much as we were and were having trouble keeping up with it all. So we were getting all of their properties. He was buying more properties on top of that. And then, just the normal turnover of properties. So it was just a tsunami of looking back, it's like, holy moly. Um, Man, this was a lot. Anyway, so yeah,
Wow.
it was basically that. It was just we were getting more properties than we could possibly fix up. And we were working with probably a dozen different contractors.
Okay, welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Today we got Matt Semegran from Emerald Century. Matt's got a lot of experience with property management, having served as the CEO of a property management company. We are so excited to have him on today because one, he's going to be able to shed some light on what it takes to scale a property management company, but more importantly, he knows when to recognize, hey, when do you actually need to pause and get your systems and structure and processes in place before you keep on scaling. And I think that's going to be a very, very important lesson for all of our listeners to listen to today and really pay attention to hearing
No
about his
matter the
story. So,
industry, man.
Matt, yeah, exactly. Matt, welcome to the show, man. So just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and how'd you got involved in real estate investing, man.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Became highly recommended by a friend and a gentleman who's becoming a partner of mine, Richard. So if you guys haven't listened to that episode, find that in somewhere in the show notes, or hit up, hey, Kent, where's the episode with Richard? Matt said I can listen to it. He's probably going to be a bigger wealth of knowledge than I am. But yeah, so I have a very unique background in kind of how I got into real estate. So as I'm sure as many listeners out there, I've been reading Bigger Pockets so for context, I'm 29. So I've been reading Bigger Pockets for the better part of a decade at this point. And if you don't know what Bigger Pockets is, hit up Kent. He'll probably tell you his favorite resources, the best articles to get started, and you are doing yourself a huge disservice. And then also just make sure you listen to this podcast here. So basically, I set myself to a boarding school when I was 16, and kind of realized college route wasn't for me. So I ended up becoming an international art dealer and a jet broker, and then kind of was like, all right, well, I really want to get to the entrepreneurial route. And so eventually started a house cleaning company with my girlfriend. And so we kind of then scaled into janitorial. We did an M&A transaction. We bought a carpet cleaning company and things like that. So I came from what I call boring but profitable businesses. These aren't the sexy businesses. We're not getting backed we're not going to the Y Combinator. We're not getting backed by a VC fund or anything like that, as much as I'd love to be. And in a previous life, I would have loved to. But it's not the way my life played out. So all along, I'm reading Bigger Pockets. I'm like, I want to get into real estate. I want to get in real estate. I want to get into real estate. I don't know contractors. I don't have relationships. I don't know how to do all these things. And all my money and time was being consumed by scaling my own companies. So anyway, and then eventually we had me and a partner invested into a house cleaning company. The investment kind of went sideways on us. And after it all kind of shook out, I was like, hey man, I talked to my partner. His name was Austin. I was like, hey man, I'm really sorry that happened. I know you bought this property management company. Let me come consult for you for a little bit, and just so I spent probably about a month or two just kind of showing up every day, helping him kind of get his head around everything for free. It was just as a favor to him because I had an investment went bad, and this was his first real company. I mean, he'd been in property management for years and years, and kind of dove right in and jumped in the deep end and acquired a small company with like 400 doors. And By the time I actually started consulting for him, he was at 900 doors. And eventually that role transitioned into me becoming the COO of that company.
Wow.
And in that time frame, it was about a little over a year, I'd say about a year and a half. We went from about 900 doors under management to 1,500. And this was purely single family. So for anybody who knows multifamily, it's like, oh, that's not a big deal. Just, you acquire 2 or 3 apartment buildings, you hire 4 or 5 people, and you're good to go. That was not the way we went. And it was largely backed by a real estate fund. So that gave me a very unique perspective. And when I was doing this, because we were growing so rapidly, I didn't have any construction management experience. So I tried to stay out of that part. I tried to stay more of like hiring and infrastructure, scaling, and just, HR and things like that. Things I actually knew and that could translate over into, because it's applicable to any business. But as time went on, like we were just going so rapidly, and it was pretty much all my partners, and to do everything. So I started getting a little bit into the construction management. I started meeting the contractors and kind of really got to feel out who everybody was and which were the good ones, which were the bad ones, and all this other fun stuff. So eventually that fund brought their arrangement in-house. And then my partner and I have been talking for months and months about wanting to become real estate investors ourselves. So like, all right, this is my opportunity. So he found the deal. I found a lender, and we dove into it. And then this was November of 2022. So like 6-7 months ago. And then, after that one, a couple weeks later, we closed on our second flip. And then about a month or two later, after that, we closed on our third flip. So we had 3 flips running. Unfortunately, they would have been a little bit faster, but we had title issues, which is a whole fun thing. So for any new investors out there, just because you get a property under contract, be prepared for something to go wrong with title. I think that's just the easiest way to describe it. We can get into the details later. Anyway, so we ended up selling 2 of the properties, and we're wrapping up the third flip right now. And I have a very unique perspective even on getting into the real estate world. I'm not the most experienced operator or the real estate investor out there. But now here I am in the process of finalizing a real estate fund. So that's what Emerald Century Capital is. We are a real estate fund. We're trying to raise about $1 million for our first fund. And, we're basically going to apply the strategy. And we have a pretty unique way we're doing it. One of the partners I'm bringing on for that and has introduced a very creative strategy for us about how we do the real estate. And, fund 2 could be 10 million and just it kind of goes from there. So I'm sure a lot of the listeners were like, well, how are you going to do that? So really I guess my first nugget of wisdom for everybody is surround yourself with people who are smarter and more experienced than you are,
Mhm.
and figure out what you're good at and how you could add value to them, and then build a team. That's my biggest. That's how I've done everything I've ever done. Is I just talk to random people, and I build teams and get them excited about what I'm doing, and try to recruit them for my projects. So anyway,
Wow,
that was a
Matt.
really
I mean
long
that.
background, but it's so it has so many twists and turns, and it's not just like, oh, I had a job and I bought a property and I just scaled from there. Like almost every single person I've ever listened to is like, I went and bought my first property. I just bit the bullet. I jumped in, I took action, and then they just scaled. It was like, no, I read Bigger Pockets for a decade. I bought I don't know how many books and courses and different things learning about real estate, and just never did because I didn't have the time or the money. It was just, so it was a very different way to get into it. So anyway,
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack here, right? And let me take it step by step. Right, you had a cleaning company, you also had an investment that went sideways, but then you carried that experience forward, Matt, and you shared with folks like, hey, I know this went sideways, but let me come in here and help you do some consulting. I want to make things right. That
for free.
instantly gives you credibility and helps with your reputation of if someone were to go like, hey, let me go find out who this Matt guy is, you can now bring up your old investor and say like, hey, look, this is what happened. It didn't go well, but this is what Matt did to kind of make up for it. Boom.
Mhm.
That's one thing. People forget that every single step of your journey matters for wherever you're going, and how you treat
Absolutely.
other people and how you maintain your reputation. That is so important. So let me take the first part. You said you grew from 900 doors to 1,500 doors, all single family, which sounds crazy. But it was
Single
backed by a
family,
real
affordable.
estate fund, affordable, but
Yes.
it was backed by a real estate fund. Help the listeners understand, what does that term mean? Backed by a real estate fund. Is it like a big hedge fund that's just buying single families and turning them into rentals? Like, what does that mean, Matt?
Yeah, essentially. Well, so I'd say it's about 80% that. So
Mm,
at least for our company, we had basically, the fund, and we had what we called our private investors. So they were just like you and I. We own one, two, four, a dozen houses. So that was a group pocket of the company of the investors, and that probably made up in the end about 400 of the doors, and I'd say the other 1,100 was by the fund. So for the listeners out there, what a fund really just boils down to is like, it's basically just go to a lot of different people who say, hey, I'm an experienced real estate investor, invest a bunch of money with me, and I'm basically going to go buy real estate and do something with it, and
mhm.
that's it in its broadest strokes. And this can be applied to every single asset class out there. It's most common in commercial, self-storage, apartments, things like that, because a one apartment deal can require $50 million just to buy
Mhm.
that one building. So that's where it's most common. But this gentleman, he had discovered that there was a major affordable housing crisis. So he had a lot of experience on Wall Street, and had a fund previously in self storage. So he was like, well, hey, for this next fund, I want to help the community. So he raised hundreds of millions of dollars,
Wow.
and was basically going in and buying up not so nice houses in the rougher parts of town. In CD
Mhm.
class neighborhoods, he was going in and buying up these distressed homes and saying, "Look, we're not just gonna put some paint on this and call it good." His mission really was to just like basically be the anti slumlord, and it was really
Mhm.
awesome. And so he, and but it was a double edged sword because he raised so much money, he was having to buy so many houses just to deploy it all,
Mm.
and a lot of the houses he was buying, the previous owners had not taken care of these for a very long time. So the
Got it.
construction projects were very large and required us to have a lot of real estate investors. So, but yeah, so I think that's in its simplest form. That's really what it was.
And I think for the listeners that are out there right now, I think some of the more common questions we get from newer investors, like, hey, how do I structure this? How do I raise capital? How do I partner with somebody? How do I make it fair? People always ask about the sense, like, how do I structure it? And part of that
Mhm.
comes from like, hey, do I create an LLC for every single property? Blah, blah, blah. And I mean, I've ran into that issue myself where I'm like, hey, it's not really scalable if I try to create one LLC to buy every single property. Just the administrative fees might kill you. So, Matt, I think that's why you're bringing up the fun idea. And it seems like that's why you're stepping into this world, is because it makes the pooling of the cash, gives you way more flexibility to
Yeah.
scale because you have more flexibility to do so, right? Is that one of the prime reasons you're going down this path, Matt? Would love to kind of provide some value to the listeners and really listen and hear like what are your thoughts? Like, why are you pursuing a fund yourself? What was kind of your launching pad for deciding to go down that path?
The simplest answer is because I had a guy tell me he had $600,000 he wants to invest with me, and he doesn't want
Love
to
it.
deal with the day-to-day stuff. He wants to be passive. And then a
Mm,
week later, after I met him, he's like, I was on the phone with a friend of his, and he said, and my pitch deck. If anybody sees a pitch deck I ever used, it was terrible, and I had no idea what I was doing. I've never raised capital before. It was just, hey, this is
yep.
what I'm doing. At the conversation, and I got 200 grand, and if it goes well, I could easily double that. So I'm like, oh wow, I'm staring down the barrel of I have $1 million of investor capital,
Hmm.
people who want to invest with me, but they want to be passive. They don't want to be actively involved in day-to-day management. And I don't know these gentlemen very, very well. My previous partners and my previous real estate deals and every business that I've ever done has been people I have kind of an ongoing relationship with. And they
Hmm.
are actually, all right, so you're going to do this part. I'll do this. You do this. Like the roles were defined. We were all going to be involved in the business. So taking passive investor capital was very different, and they wanted the upside. The whole conversation started because I was telling him about how I've raised hard money loans and all this stuff like that. He's like, "Well, that's expensive money. Would you be open to, profit sharing in your deals?" Like, yeah, absolutely. And that kind of then morphed into, well, hey, I want to be an equity investor with you. And it's like, okay, that's a different story. If you're just going to write me a loan, that's pretty simple. You can go talk to any real estate attorney. You just get a note and a deed of trust on the property, and there you go. You can raise capital that way. But because these gentlemen wanted to kind of participate in the upside and kind of, really make some money together, it was like, well, I need to make sure I'm doing this correctly. So I invested,
Hmm.
a ton of money into learning basically how to start a fund. And, I don't recommend it for everybody. I mean, it has to, you got to look at your situation and look with what you want to do with your life. I'm 29, I'm a younger guy. I'm a business builder by nature. So, to me, this is the ultimate form of entrepreneurship, and this is what I actually want to do for the long haul. But if you're like, look, I just want to own a couple properties, I want my life to be, I'm going to have to deal with attorneys, legal
Mm,
compliance. There's things I have to say and can't say. Like I can't say, oh, you're going to get. I have to say we're projecting. Like there's so much regulation around funds because it's people have lost a lot of money
yep.
that it is not for the faint of heart. I'll say that. So if you're just
Perfect.
getting
This
started,
is a
you don't
perfect
have a great
time
team
for
around
some.
you. Oh, sorry,
This
go
is a
ahead.
perfect time for some disclaimers right here. This is not
Yes.
investment, legal,
Yes, this is not
financial
legal advice,
advice.
investment advice.
Yeah,
Your
this is
questions
not.
about like, do I do
This,
one LLC or do I do multiple? It's like there's everything there's pros, there's trade-offs to everything.
yep,
One
and
of
this
my best
is all this
friends.
information is like purely for informational and entertainment uses only. This is not a
Yes.
solicitation for funds or investments or
Nope.
construed in that sense of any kind. So, Matt, sorry for interrupting you, but
No,
I
no, you're
figured that was
totally
a good
fine.
time to go through that.
You're right. Hey, for the listeners out there, this is my third podcast I've ever been on. So, I appreciate Ken for having me on. I'm not used to like disclaiming that up front. Like me, Kevin, he's always like, or Graham Steffen's always like, oh, hey, this is not investment advice, and then goes into things. So I'll learn. I appreciate Ken. Thank you for the reminder. The attorneys out there, please don't sue me, bro. For me, Kevin fans. But yeah, I mean that's really what it is. Like if you're not sure whether you should do one LLC or multiple, ask an attorney, ask an insurance agent, and like get it. My favorite saying is diversity in counsel and unity in command. It's like I listened to an insurance agent talk about this too, where he's like, get one LLC and you just get a blanket policy and you're fine. So he has a different perspective than an attorney would be, where he's like, no, you only want to like 1 to 3 or 5 properties per LLC. So I don't know is the answer. Talk to people in your circle, talk to your advisors, and then make the best decision for what you think is right for you. You know, um,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
Matt, thank you for explaining that your thought process behind why a fund is so advantageous, right, for real estate investing. I'm curious, like when you
can
went
be.
into, right, when you scaled, your company scaled from like 900 to 1,500 doors, we talked a little bit about before the call where, hey, at some point you actually said, hey, let's pause, let's get our stuff together and
Mhm.
get all of our stuff in order so that we can scale even better. Can you help share that story with folks? Like what was going on at the time when you guys were growing so much and what sort of issues were you guys running into?
Yeah. So, and this was not an easy decision too. Like it took about 3 or 4 months of us just, for lack of a better word, honestly, pleading with the fund managers of just please stop buying houses. They kept buying. So to explain a little bit of the context. So funds, again, one of the reasons why funds are not the best reason for everybody is once you take the capital, you now have a ticking time bomb, or not ticking time bomb, but a clock is now running against you. The second you take that money, you now have to deploy that because, I'm trying to make this really generous without making this a thing all about fun. So like, there's a couple of different reasons why, but basically, as soon as you take that money, you have to either deploy it as rapidly as possible, or if you do take it actually into your bank account, you're going to owe fees on that money, and you're going to owe a return on that investor money, whether you did anything with it or not. So they were under a very unique set of circumstances where they have to be buying houses, have to be getting that money out into real estate, acquiring their assets, getting things fixed up, getting rent coming in. They have to move very, very fast. And that's one of the reasons why I say it's not for everybody. Like, it is a very high pressure thing, and then plus also you're dealing with people's money. Like, they were going after as well institutional money. So that's pension funds, that's teachers union, that's insurance companies. That's like, this is people's retirement you're dealing with, and that is a whole different level of pressure and stress and an entirely different world. So he was under a tremendous amount of pressure. And I think it's very important to open this, because it's like, you have to see it from his perspective before we can get into why it was so difficult. Because everything always has two sides. So he was under a tremendous amount of pressure to, he had your average, you could be somebody who's listening to this, whether you knew it or not, your grandma or your mom or your friend's retirement may have been reliant on this guy performing and this guy buying houses in a timely fashion. So anyway, so basically it took us several months, because let's say it's June 4th right now. Okay. Let's say he bought 100 houses on May 1st. There were varying conditions, and let's say, 80 of them needed rehab, and we were only to get 50 of them done in the month of May. Well, it's now June 1st. Austin, here you go. Here's another 100. Here's another 100 houses. I know you still have 30 houses you haven't finished renovating and aren't tenanted and aren't ready, but you got another 100. So now we're starting going to June with 130 houses, and let's say 100 of them need rehab, and then we're only going to get now we're only able to get 50 of them done. Now we're going into July with 60 houses needing renovation and another 100 on top of that. So it dug us such a hole that it was really, really hard to get out of. And as well, the other challenge we were going through really too is that, so at first, as he was the fund manager, he was doing a very prudent thing where he had a couple of different property managers. He had like 3 he started out with. I came on, he was basically in the transition of cutting it down to 2. And then, 6 months later, he basically then, at the end of it, we were the only property manager. So we were basically getting properties from other property management companies who weren't doing their job or probably were drowning just as much as we were and were having trouble keeping up with it all. So we were getting all of their properties. He was buying more properties on top of that. And then, just a normal turnover of properties. So it was just a tsunami of looking back, it's like, holy moly. Man, this was a lot. Anyway, so yeah, it was just, it was basically that. It was just, we were getting more properties than we could possibly fix up. And we were working with probably a dozen different contractors, of varying degrees.
And Matt, I'm going to let you keep going, but I'm going to pause really quick just so the listeners are following us, because you said a really good point earlier about there are pros and cons to everything, right? Every sort of strategy. And with being a fund manager, what you were talking about, sometimes like one example so the listeners can resonate a little bit is like there's something called a preferred return. And in a preferred return situation, that means those returns get paid out to your investors. Usually you offer that as a fund manager because you want to entice people to invest. You're like, oh, I get some upside first before we do it, like any sort of splits. Yeah. So let's just say there's a 12% preferred return, which means when the moment someone gives you money, you are owing them 1% every single month, assuming it's a 12% preferred return, 12 divided by 12 months. So that's why Matt was talking about how the fund manager is under tremendous pressure to deploy this capital as fast as possible, because that ticking time bomb, that's basically you are owing 1% on this money, regardless of whatever you do with it. So if you let it sit in the bank account, you are going to lose 1% on that money before you even did anything with it, if you didn't do anything with it within that 1 month. And as Matt talked about, if you have a couple months to renovate properties and get things up and running, like that preferred return accrues. Like you don't just get like, oh, this is going to wait until we get a property up. As soon as it comes to your bank account, it starts accruing. So I just want to pause there and just make sure like the listeners were following what you were saying there, Matt. And
actually, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to pull on that string a little bit, because that's only actually half the story. So what Ken is talking about is absolutely correct. And the way I explain it in my pitch is like, look, we understand when I go into an investor, I say, look, I understand you can put your money in the stock market. Yeah, there's volatility, but if you look over a long enough time horizon, 40, 50 years, you're going to see about 7 to 10% return on your money. So, and it's liquid, you can always pull your money out, et cetera, et cetera. So I say, look, in understanding that understanding for that risk, we're going to give you the first 8, 10, 11, 12%. Every fund manager is different. That's the great thing about funds is you can make it whatever you want. So that first 8 to 12% we get is going to you, the investor. And so Ken was actually said is absolutely correct, but it's actually, that's only half the coin. The other half is, in those months, me as the fund manager, I'm hiring, I got to pay myself. I have insurance. I have, various softwares. I have employees I got to manage. I have tons of other expenses I'm not making any money on, because it's like the first 12% the fund makes goes back to the investors before I see a cent. Now, some funds will do a 2% management fee, but again, it's like that is not necessarily enough to cover all the expenses that go with making a fund. So it's like, for the business owners out there, imagine all of the expenses you have today, plus now you have to pay tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees just to get the business started, because again, this is a very compliance heavy thing. Now you have required financial audits, you have extra legal expenses. Again, everything you're doing has to be done legally. So you have additional overhead that you're not even getting, that you're paying for all of that before you make a cent. So you have to so if a normal business has to get a 12% return before they actually start profitable, a fund has to get like a 15 to 20% return before they actually start getting anything. And then of that return that's above the pref, you only get a slice of that. Most common funds are going to be an 80-20 split. So it's like, even once we clear that first 12%, everything above that, 80% of that money is then going back to the investors. Because again, it's their capital risk. It's like they need to be compensated for the risk they're taking. So the numbers for fund managers can be extremely burdensome, can be extremely stressful, and that's why I don't recommend it for everybody. It's like entrepreneurship, but on steroids, for lack of a better word. So anyway,
yeah,
so
there's a barrier to entry, right? For sure.
Yes.
And I think with that responsibility, you got to make sure you have all infrastructure in place. So let's talk about that, Matt. Let's talk about, so you just gave an example of like, hey, you have this entire backlog now of properties that the fund manager is buying a lot, but you guys aren't able to turn them around and renovate them and get them set up fast enough. At what point did you guys say like, whoa, this is way too much, it's too much of a backlog? Tell us what was going on during that situation.
It's also been a couple of years, so I'm going to do my best to recall. And I kind of stepped into the middle of it too, where we're already kind of going on. So I'm gonna try to like make this as general as possible, because some people out there, the other thing is too, I want to remind the listeners, I think Ken made a good point in this too when we were talking in the pre-show, is this is not just property management, this is not just real estate, this is any company out there. Like, you can scale too quickly, and it is a real problem, whether it be tech or cleaning or anything. Any business out there can grow too fast. So I think the easiest thing is when mistakes happen. Projects. Anything that happens, like, there's always gonna be delays. The saying goes, like, if somebody gives you an estimate, add 20% to it for the time frame.
Yes.
Because something's gonna come up. So I think
Yes.
probably the easiest and the fastest warning signs is if every single project is getting behind. And if you think renovation is going to take this long, and then we're going to get, or for us, for example, we were expecting to get 30 doors done and rented this month, or 50 doors done and rented this month, and we only got 10 or 20, stuff like that. It's like, look for the small things where every area of your business is just feels like it's always behind and nothing's getting done on time. Another good example might be, how are you feeling as a business owner? So it's a combination with, how's your team feeling? Like, talk to your team. Like, how are they doing? Are they struggling? Are they like, man, we're really struggling to keep up with all of this? And then also, how on a percentage basis, how quickly is your company growing? Like, are you doubling every single year, or are you growing? Like, if your average has been, let's say you're a small company, you're able to grow 50% per year, and then something happens to where now you're growing 200% that year, there's going to be some challenges. And, so just like, kind of look at your previous history of like, how quickly were you able to grow, and then just really talk to your team.
Yeah. And I love that, Matt, because I think the analogy I would use is like, hey, it doesn't matter how it's like, hey, if you have a really, really skinny pipe and you try to put all this water pressure through it, the pipe is going to
Mm,
burst. And
yes.
if you
Love it.
didn't create a pipe that's wide enough to take in all the extra volume of projects and everything, you're not setting yourself up for success, and you're just going to cause everyone to be like bursting at the seams. Like no one's
Yes.
going to be really happy to be in those situations. And I think, Matt, I think that's what's really cool to hear about your experience, because I think so many times our listeners, like, we start in single family
Hmm.
and we like, hey, do one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. But boom, what do you get so much capital that you could buy 100 at a time? But did you really have your crews all set? Did you have your property management systems in place to actually take on that amount of volume? And sometimes
Right.
most people is no, like, you don't recognize you need that stuff in place until the projects kind of hit.
And then even so, if for me, for example, even if, so now I'm in a different position to where I'm now being the fund manager, but if you're as you as the investor, do your contractors, does your team, does your vendor team, are they ready for that volume? For contractors, for example. So we were working with contractors who were literally just a one-man show. Shout out to Mike. He's a great dude. He's essentially a handyman. I mean, he was
Wow.
phenomenal work, but he was one guy. And we were all the way up to Tyler now, who's my partner and he's my go-to contractor. He had 5 crews he was running.
Wow.
So like if you had a whole team of just Mikes, if you're used to just being one or two at a time, let's say your property manager was used to you onboarding 1 or 2 properties a year, your contractors were used to doing 1 or 2 houses at a time, kind of, let's say, a paint and carpets, and suddenly you get into, hey, I'm buying 10 houses a month and these are total gut jobs down to the studs. Your contract, are your vendor, even if you personally are ready, is your vendor team, are they ready? Is your property management company now ready to start taking on 10 houses a month? Are your contractors, can they double their crew capacity, maintain the same quality of work you're used to? Are they ready? So that's what I'm saying. Like, you got to talk to your team. It's not always just your W-2 employees that you hired. It's also the people around you. Are they ready to grow with you? And I think the reason I speak to this is why I say, like, I'm not a VC. I didn't go to Y Combinator, because that's an entirely different animal. Like, if you go raise tens of millions of dollars in equity capital and to do all this as like a tech company, that's an entirely different story. Like, you can hire 50 people or 10 people at the get go. You can hire all these people ready to go. But if you're just a normal business owner, if you're a boring but profitable business like I was, and you're bootstrapping your company, which is like, you're not raising a ton of money, you're basically reinvesting your profits, you're growing that way. It's an entirely different story, and it's a different perspective, and it requires a different mindset when you approach growth. You can't have the same hockey stick growth that a company backed by a VC can. So that's just something to keep in mind.
And I think that's so important when you talked about your contractors, where, that's a good question, Matt. Like, how did you spot, or how do you vet contractors nowadays? Because operation is such a big piece of this, right? You can't just take in money and snap your finger and everything just magically appears like all renovated. How are you vetting your contractors? How are you picking your partners? What sort of evaluation criteria do you have in place to make sure that you're picking the right people for your team to execute on your planned, your funds planned?
Right. So again, I have a really weird way of going about this. So when I was working for the property management company, thankfully Austin and also all the team members that we had hired, they had years and years of experience with property management companies, so they had already kind of pre-built those relationships pre-built the relationships with the contractors, so they kind of knew, like, hey, like, hey, I'm working for this company now, come join us. Or Austin was like, hey, I've got these guys, they're all good and solid. So I really didn't have to do a lot of vetting. And put me in kind of in a fortunate position, because again, I didn't come from a lot of construction management experience. And then now what I'm doing is I basically just said, I picked a really great contractor who's also a GC. His name is Tyler. Shout out to Tyler and Great Plains Preservation. I basically like, hey man, look, I don't want to learn this world. Like, I make this joke that my way of fixing things growing up was like, hey Butch, something's broke, because my dad, he grew up in the Bronx. He grew up in apartments his whole life. And so I never learned to be handy. It's not what I'm good at, and stuff like that. And I tried, on one of my flips, project got behind. I started meeting Tyler out there at 7, 8 o'clock at night at Home Depot and Floor and Decor. And I tried laying some tile. I hated it. I was terrible. He was like, he's sitting right there. I'm like, Tyler, how do you do this? Like, I'm struggling so hard. He's like, man, I don't get you, man. Like, if I lost everything, tile was what I get back into. Like that. He's like, that is my jam. That's like, I don't know. It's just how my brain works. So Essentially, to answer your question, make a long story less long, how I screen contractors is I went and partnered with the contractor. And
Mm.
as I make people, I'm like, hey, if you want to be one of our team, go talk to Tyler. Like he's just going to run that whole. He's going to run that. It's just he knows he can talk to a contractor and be like, all right, that PEX or what's the difference between PEX or something. I don't even know how to ask the questions to screen the contractors. So I'm not even going to try to ask like this is what an example question of what Tyler would ask somebody because like all the contractors out there are gonna be like, dude, this guy has no idea what he's doing. What did he just say? It's gonna be great. So
But
again,
Matt, I think that's so cool though. I think that's exactly why you have to build a team. And I think for everyone, I remember when I started in real estate and I thought to myself, like, man, I'm not the handiest guy. I can probably plunge a toilet, but that's pretty
yeah,
much it, man. Like, I don't really want to go out there and vet these contractors and stay on top of them and say, hey, why are you drywalling this way or why are you putting a
mhm,
water heater here and there? That's not my jam either. But I think that's
yeah,
why you got to work with some people that's like, hey, someone out there loves that part.
yeah,
And it's hard to find those people because I mean, it's a really big world and you don't know where to start sometimes, but you have to start and you got to ask around, go to your meetups and meet other people, but you got to bring something to the table. And I think, Matt, you have been able to show that you can raise capital, right? You're just
mhm.
going to raise like 600 grand from one person, 200 grand from another person, boom, boom, boom.
Turn
Like that's
cold into
also a
ice,
skill.
100 grand. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So like that's what I'm good at.
Yeah.
Just
And
team.
for some people, they'll be like, they will cringe at the fact like, oh, I don't want to go to any conferences. I don't want to go into a room with
Oh,
100 people and shake all those hands. Like that would make some people cringe, right? But
oh
you're
yeah,
willing to
or
do that.
exhausted.
Yeah. Very exhausted. I get networked out sometimes when I go to some of these conferences, man. There's a
Awesome, I
lot of
love it.
people. Yeah.
I so yeah, Ken. I think you're 100% spot on. Sorry to interrupt, but no, it guys, listen to Ken. Exactly what he just said. You have to look inward. You have to look at yourself, and also look at your experience. Like he was just saying, you know, even if you enjoy, even if I enjoy being a contractor, I've done it probably 3 days, maybe in the total time I've done fixing things. If you add up all the time I've ever fixed things in my entire life, I probably spent 3 days cumulatively.
Mm.
Tyler, my partner, he's been a contractor his whole life. All his family is contractor. His dad is a contractor. He said his brother owns a framing company. His cousin owns a concrete company. Like his entire network and sphere of influence are all contractors. You know, I'm not. I could learn and be okay at it, but like it's just not what I specialize in. But like it's funny. My girlfriend Amanda is always like, "Man, I'm exhausted listening to you on the phone all day." I'm loving it. I'm an extrovert. Like I am super energized by talking to people. So I think one of the nuggets for the listeners out there, go take the Big Five personality test. See where you are. See where you lie on the extroversion introversion scale. And a really good tip for that is like when you go to a meetup, let's say it on a random Tuesday or Wednesday, go to a meetup. It'll be in the evening, so you're gonna be a little tired from work. And when you leave that meeting, on the drive home, notice how do you feel? Are you energized? Are you super wired up? Because like, oh, I just talked to like 10 people and I spent a couple hours socializing. I'm just like, oh, this is so great. I wonder who wants to go to get some drinks now because it's like 10 o'clock at night on a Tuesday. And I'm like, I don't want to go to sleep because I'm so excited from talking to people. Or you're like, oh my God, please just get me home. I'm so freaking exhausted. Why did I have to talk to so many people? I just want to go home and read a book or watch Netflix and just shut the world out. You know, that's the easiest barometer for are you introverted or extroverted. And even if you're introverted, like you're just like if you're the latter where you're like I just want to go home and hide from people, you can be outgoing. 'Cause that's another big thing I see people keep getting confused. It's like, yeah, but I can talk to people. It's like, yeah, that's fine. I get you can even if you're introverted, you can learn to be outgoing. You can learn to be bubbly when you're there in person. But if you leave that experience, like you said, with a conference, if you leave that conference drained and exhausted from talking to so many people, go find an extrovert. Go find some weirdo like me who's going to love talking to 100 different people and just talk all day long every day. You know? Sorry, I
Yeah,
didn't
and
know
I
what to
think
I think that is
no,
so key, though.
that is so perfect because I have finally given myself permission to stop working on my weaknesses, right? I think
Yeah.
that sometimes like where people I think when I was entering corporate America, people always ask me like, hey, what are your weaknesses? And it's like such a politically correct answer that always comes. I was like, you're asking the wrong questions. I would
Mhm.
much rather prefer, okay, what's your weakness? What are you not good at? Cool. Do I have someone in mind that can plug that weakness for the entire team so that everyone stays focused on
Bingo.
what gives them energy. And that's how you get a team of A players at all of their own positions, right? It's just like playing
Bingo.
baseball. Not everyone's going to be a catcher. Not everyone's going to be a pitcher. Not everyone's going to be the best hitter. But
Yeah.
if everybody is, you're getting A players at every single position, that's how you create a championship team. So
Oh, that's so great.
I absolutely love that. And Matt, maybe this is a good time for us to like, so your background is like just incredible, man. You've done so many different things,
That's a
and you've
nugget
done a
for the
property management
listeners.
company.
Sorry, like
And-
seriously, listeners, go back and listen to that. What Kent just said, drill that into your head, because that is 100. What Kent just said is 100% right. Like, figure out what you're good at, and go get partners who are good at what you're weak at, and make sure what you're good at is where they're weak at. You know,
Correct.
So we listen to that clip from Kent. You need to like soundbite that and put that on TikTok and everything, because that's fantastic. Anyway,
no, I love that.
my background.
Well, yeah, Matt. Well, I'm trying to understand, like, hey, what kind of mistakes have you made in your investment journey? Because I think this is like where people get the millions and millions of dollars of value from. It's like, hey,
Mhm.
if I have learned from Matt's mistakes, wherever that it is in your investment journey, like, why did your partnerships go south or sideways, or what type of issues have you faced when you were part of a scaling operation? I think the listeners would just be interested in hearing, like, hey, what mistakes have you made, and what would you give them in terms of tactical advice that they can implement to avoid those mistakes?
How much time do we have?
Oh, dude, we got 30 minutes at the minimum. I can stay on for you, man.
Yeah, because I mean, like, for me at least, like, I love things like, Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan. I love guys like that, where like it's long podcasts because they can really go down the rabbit hole. And I'm also I come across, also for the listeners out there, if you're listening to any other podcast, I'm sorry if I come across as very verbose. I don't mean to. It's just like, especially for something like this, where like if somebody's kind of newer in the industry and they want to understand I don't want to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I want people to say, okay, this is what I'm doing, and like, here's why I do what I'm doing.
Mhm.
I'm explaining why I think about the things I think about, because I'm always looking for, like what Kent was just saying, like I'm looking for either good nuggets to pull out, or honestly looking for Kent to just be like, Matt, you're a complete idiot. Here's why. You said these like 5 points, you're wrong on point 2, 3, and 4. So that's, if I come across as verbose, when you meet me in person, you talk with me ever, that's just the way I operate. I'm not a short-winded person, and I'm not surface level. So I love things like this, because this is where now we're getting to the real meat. If I just said, if I just said something like, so here's my first easiest mistake. I paid a contractor before we actually officially own the property. That's a big no-no, Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So
Wow.
obviously that's mistake number one. Now, luckily it worked out, but yeah, everything was fine. But so the reason I did that is because I was in a position where I was really struggling, and I had to get a property done. I wanted to get these flips going. I was so eager. I was so excited, and just so like, I got to start making some money in real estate. I've been wanting to do this for so long. I got to get this flip going. Oh, this is a title issue. It'll get fixed next week. It's not a big deal. And also the contractor and the seller came to me referred by somebody who was close to me. Actually, she was my boss at the time. So I was working for the management consulting company, and so that's a big no-no. So if I just said, "Oh, don't go pay a contract beforehand," it's like, yeah, people who are where I was, who are so excited. All right, this is my second deal. Like, I'm invincible. I'm brand new at this. I can do no wrong. I'm excited to finally be in this situation. I'm excited, the excitement of like, I'm under contract of buying this property. If I don't go into that, explain the why I did what I did, then people are like, oh, they're gonna brush me off. Like, yeah, but I know it didn't work. He said not to do it, but I'm different, because I do it all the time. You hear advice and like, that's what that person said, but here's why I'm different, because I'm this or I'm that. So anyway.
I love that. You're like, this doesn't apply. People will say that all the time, like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. But I think what you said right there is so important, where people get really emotional about the first deal. I can't tell you how many times, like, hey, we have imposter syndrome, we have comparison issues. Like, sometimes you're in these Facebook groups and you're comparing, like, oh, wow, this person got their first deal in a week. Like, why am I not there? And you start beating yourself down, and then you start compounding those mistakes because you are so eager to get that deal that you might accidentally, I don't know, fudge a number here or there on a spreadsheet to make the numbers work. And that is a really, really, really bad idea, because I see so many people buying deals now, and I'm running the numbers on my own. I was like, that doesn't seem realistic. Like, how are you projecting that for renovations? How are you projecting that for revenue when the comps don't support it? I don't get it. But I understand probably the psychology behind what happened was they got really excited about just wanting to post that they got a deal instead
Mhm.
of actually realizing whether or not that was a deal. So that's a
Yes.
great point there, Matt. I love that you brought up that story.
Yeah, and so I mean that's the easiest, the biggest one. And to kind of pull on that, one of the easiest ways to solve that, it's like so when I dropped out of college and everything, I basically put myself down a sales career because I'm like, hey, I dropped out. I'm 19 years or 18, 19 years old. I can't remember. I dropped out of college 3 times. Like, all right, clearly I'm not gonna be able. How am I gonna be able to make money if I'm a college dropout? So I went down the sales career, and that's how got into art dealing and jet broking, all this other fun stuff. And so one of my favorite sales trainers out there, UK's most hated sales trainer, by the way. Absolutely fantastic guy. One of the things he says is like salespeople get emotionally tied to a deal when they don't want to prospect, when they don't have a very full pipeline. So I got
Uh,
emotionally tied to the property because I didn't have 5 other properties I could look at. I didn't have relationships with
oh,
with wholesalers and real estate agents and doing my own thing. I didn't have a ton of other because I was new. This was the second property I was ever going to buy, and I was just so excited. I wasn't looking at 30 properties. Like, so now again, this is also a good time to give a shout out to Stephanie Singer, who is now going to be coming on for our head of acquisitions for the fund. She's been doing this for so long. She'll look at 30, 50 deals and say, all right, Matt, these are the 2 or 3, 4, maybe 5 that we're going to buy. She has that emotional discipline because she has so many. So for the listeners out there who are wanting to justify, who are doing what Kent is just saying, where it's like, I'm getting excited, I'm gonna massage the numbers, um, for the diplomat in me. We're gonna massage the numbers to make this work, or we're gonna project everything to be very very aggressive. We're not going to budget or plan conservatively. you know, that might be one of the reasons why. So if you find your for the nugget for the listeners out there, this is essentially what I'm trying to say. If you find yourself getting emotionally attached to an outcome, whether it be a sale you're making in your business, or whether it be a client you have right now, or a property you're looking at, whatever it is, it's probably because you don't have enough other alternatives out there.
wow. That is
I'll let
probably like the best gem I've heard about how to control your emotions, man. That just makes so much sense because if you don't have leads, you don't have a business, guys.
Mhm.
And this is the perfect way to explain it. Of sometimes, like when you, like I met plenty of wholesalers, and sometimes I hear about a lot of people starting and stopping wholesaling because they get a lead and then try to follow up on that lead and they try to close on a lead. But then once they're trying to close on a lead, they forget to keep the pipeline going for generating more leads to them into the pipeline.
Mhm.
And when you don't have a conveyor belt set up, like you mentioned, you have an acquisitions person,
Mhm.
genius, because now you can have someone solely focus on that part of looking at deals, and then you can have more people solely focus on turning these properties around. And now everybody again can play their positions and get you the best outcome for the fund as a whole. And that's what it really takes to kind of scale this. So great points there,
Exactly.
Matt.
And
Absolutely love that, man.
that frees me up to have to suffer all the brain damage to deal with all the legal and the compliance and stuff like that. So again, it's just shout out to Stephanie. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I could go learn to how to vet deals and how to screen and do due diligence and all that stuff like that, and look at crime data and look at neighborhood statistics and all that sort of stuff like that. And I could probably learn. I could probably be halfway decent at it. But why would I want to? And Stephanie's been doing this whole career, and she's like, I've been a realtor for I don't know how long. And she's like, I have found my specialty, my niche is I'm a great acquisition specialist for funds. Like, so she's helped in 2021, she helped buy about 104 doors, buy, acquire, and also kind of coordinate the rehabs. And in
Wow.
2022 was 174 doors. And I was talking to her about it, and she's like, the 90 of those doors, or 100 of those 174 doors, happened in the first 90 days. And again, that fund was pretty smart. So like, whoa, slow down, let us get caught up. So deal flow is not her problem, and so she just knows how to vet them so quickly. So, especially, and for the wholesalers out there, if you got questions, or I've actually got some different lending programs I'm actually working for with lenders on.
Hmm.
If you got questions, reach out to me and Kent. We could probably talk to you and help you in some capacity. But if wholesaling is a great way to get started. And so if you're struggling, like what Kent just said, if you're like, I'm so attached to this homeowner, go prospect, go find more homeowners. Always be talking to more and more homeowners, no matter what you're
Yeah,
doing.
and I love this part because someone has to deal with other lawyers like the SEC attorneys and all that stuff, the accountants and everything. There's a
Make
job
sure
for
reports get out
everybody.
on time.
Yeah, it's
So
very
that's
important. You got to communicate to your investors, right?
yeah.
Absolutely.
And not only communicate to your investors, but you also got to show them how you're doing. Like, Ken, if you gave me 100 grand, and let's say this was in May, in the next couple of days, you're expecting some kind of report from me saying, all right, how are we doing? How many houses did you buy? What's our vacancy rate? Like, just a quick, simple update. I've networked with a lot of different fund managers, and I've talked to some who have said, like, look, even me as a fund manager, I've invested into other private funds, and there was one fund he invested in, and he didn't get his January report until June, so he had to wait 6 months just to know how 1 month happened. So that's a key component of this too, and this is also applicable even if you're not starting a fund. I do this with my lenders too. Like my lenders, I'll text them, hey, here's some pictures, how things are going. Hey, we're about 2 weeks out from wrapping up. Hey, actually, just kidding, we're adding a fourth bedroom now. I'm keeping my lenders, even if they're not like technically investors with me, I'm keeping them in the loop. I'm making sure they know how their product is doing. So if you're just getting started and you're going to find a friend who's going to just do a private money loan for you, so you're giving them a note and a deed of trust, and it's just like, I'm going to pay you 10% a year, and you're going to be my lender on this property. Keep them in the loop. Just it doesn't have to be every single day because they don't want to be bogged down with the details. Just send them a photo. When you got a big kitchen's done, send them the photo. Just little things like that. People really appreciate communication.
Oh man, I love that. And so Matt, I want to bring this conversation now to the affordable housing side, because I
Yes.
want to understand, like, you ran such a big portfolio of affordable housing, and you talked about sometimes you guys the fund bought some properties in like less than ideal neighborhoods. I'm curious to understand from you, one, what makes affordable housing investors successful? Because I think that's going to be really important, because sometimes we just hear about the stigma of like, hey, affordable housing, just all low incomes, the guns, drugs, and drama. I'm trying to overcome that stigma. And I'm really trying to understand, like, hey, where did you guys see success investing in affordable housing? What were the pros and cons sort of associated with affordable housing for you guys?
Yeah, so I have a bit unique perspective on this because the fund, they were only Section 8. Like, that's it. Every single house they bought, they only wanted to put it on the Section 8 program. And so for the newer listeners out there, it's also sometimes known as the voucher program, or it's the government guaranteed rent, for a good majority of it. I've seen some tenants who literally their monthly payment for the rent for like a $1,200-1,300 month place is $10, is $20. So pretty good. And these people, they need a good quality place to live. And so first and foremost, if you're going down this route, please have the attitude of you don't want anybody to be able to know the difference between whether it's a voucher Section 8 affordable property or a market property. Don't be a slumlord. I'm gonna put that out first.
Love that.
Because that was the fund manager's goal. He's like, I don't want people to know the difference. I want people to go to a neighborhood and not know, and I'm gonna say, oh, that's the Section 8 house, because that's the first problem. It's like that gets such a stigma. Oh, that's how these things end up. And I don't know how and why, because at least from my perspective, Section 8 inspectors are usually really good about pointing stuff out, and So anyway, so what makes them successful? Well, I think first off, don't be a slumlord. That's a good way. Because I mean, honestly, like, I kind of say it tongue in cheek, but I'm also like mostly serious, because like almost any city has a huge backlog of people waiting, of people who I've been approved for a Section 8 voucher. I'm waiting for a house to open up. So if you're able to deal with the bureaucracy, which some of it is, but some of it is also because they're trying to keep the house safe, and I mean, you'll never have a problem finding tenants. So that's one of the things. One of the other kind of tactical things, you got to think about this really. So for us personally, we found that not including utilities in the rent is a key thing. And now if you have rain collectors and solar panels and things like that, you may be able to offer, you include utilities, because it does give you a nice little bump in rent. But for us, at least, we wanted to make sure that the tenants our residents, was responsible. They had some skin in the game. So we said, hey, we will work with voucher programs that will cover the rent, and the utilities is on the individual resident. Otherwise, the easy example we give is like, if your toilet's leaking, if your sink is leaking, but you're not paying the water bill, who cares? You're just going to let it go for 6 months, because it's no skin on it's nothing to you. Like, you're not paying the bill. So, and also it helps teach people also good financial management, because the hope is they're going to move up into the world. So lots of different reasons why, but that was one of the tactics we learned. Don't pay for utilities. Of course, there's exceptions. Let's see. Um, Download the forms. A lot of the next thing I would think would make people, at least if you're going into the Section 8 world, because that's what I'm going to speak to, because that's the affordable housing space I know and understand. Um, get familiar with what the standards are ahead of time, because a lot of this stuff is public information, like HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is kind of the federal program that regulates all this. They make these forms available about all the things that they're going to specify that this is what needs to happen to pass an inspection. Now, some of it can be really kind of, I'm going to say silly. It just kind of is what it is. So like on an example, we have a toilet, and if for listeners out there, imagine you're looking at your toilet right now. Hopefully it's clean. And the screws that keep it screwed into the floor, then there's a little cap on there. So if you guys have cats, I'm sure they're always knocking it off and playing with it. But if that cap's not there, they can fail an inspection for you, because every single safety item has to pass the inspection before they allow a tenant to move in. Now, that was kind of one of the silly ones. So, and there can be other things. It's just like making sure that everywhere there's an outlet cover, and that one seems like, well, who cares? But it's like, well, a kid can stick their finger in there and then they're going to electrocute it. So always remember that all the Section 8 standards are because they want to keep the homeowner safe. So just understand that, familiarize yourselves with them. And then if you're like me and you're a complete idiot when it comes to fixing things, and you're having contractors, give them the standards and make sure they're familiar with it. Or try to find like guys like my partner Tyler, who's like, we were basically brought in by other funds to make sure, like, not only do they know what all these Section 8 standards are, and they were brought in by other funds to make sure that their houses would pass. But he was like, I just fix every single house I touch is fixed to the Section 8 standards, regardless of whether it's going on the program or not. Because again, it's about safety. They want to make sure nobody's going to get hurt in the place. And it can be things like, making sure your windows don't have, your glass doesn't have cracks in it. There's outlet covers, no live wires. It's pretty simple stuff. So
yeah, and some of this stuff is like common sense too, right? Matt, it's like, hey, yeah, not only are you putting an outlet cover there so a kid doesn't stick your finger in there, but that also helps prevent a lawsuit from you being sued as a landlord. It's actually advantageous from that perspective. So I loved your gems about not including utilities, because that's a really good perspective you had there. How about screening property tenants or prospective tenants? Did you guys have like specific policies and procedures in place that allowed you to weed out sort of bad apples from the bunch?
Yeah. So, I'll give a shout out to my partner Austin, because he had a really cool perspective on this. Like, obviously, we pulled credit reports, background checks, all things like that. We made sure you didn't have a criminal history. I know that there are some programs out there who will work with people who are sex offenders or violent people and stuff like that. And I'm really glad they're out there. It wasn't for us, because again, we were having to do so many, and we didn't have the support systems in place to kind of make sure that things were going right. So for us, we want to make sure it was a clean background check, credit report, because they had to pay utilities, and they did. Most often it was a couple $100 was what their tenant portion was, or the copay, I guess you could think of it as. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to collect that on time. And in the credit report, this is kind of a tip for all the property managers out there. Don't be super worried about medical bills. There's a lot of people out there who have really bad credit because they got sick or they got injured and went in the hospital, and they fell behind on that. So we would basically look for, are they paying their car? Are they paying, that was a big one. So you don't pay at least, again, depends on where you live. For us in the Midwest, if you don't have a car, you're going to have a hard time getting a job, which just means you're going to fall behind on rent and, things like that. So we made sure that was in order, make sure like the utilities always were in order, make sure those were always paid on time, and things like that. But if you were behind on a credit card or medical bills, we looked at that as like, okay, yeah, that's probably fine. We also made sure that they weren't in any lawsuits with landlords. Again, that was one of the things we looked at, where we're mindful of. We want to see, okay, no evictions too. That was the big thing. It's no evictions on the history. Again, I know there's a lot of landlords out there who are people listening to this, like, I want to help those people, and that's fantastic. And I applaud you wanting to do that. I just wasn't in this situation because, again, the volume of homes we were having to do, we couldn't be as accommodating with people with unique circumstances as ethical as I would have liked to be. But again, you have to find that line for yourself somewhere, and those are the easy ones. So it's basically clean criminal history, not behind on car rent, and making sure all utilities were paid, and then just making sure there's no evictions within some 5 to 7 years, something like that.
Yeah. And I love this part because Matt, I think you highlighted very well that hey, just because it is an affordable housing rental, it doesn't mean that you can't set your own standards. Now that has to be
Mhm.
uniformly applied across all your tenant base or all your applicants base. So it's not discriminatory,
Yeah.
but it's up to you to decide what your criteria is because the housing authority or Section 8 is not going to force a tenant upon you. You still have
Mhm.
to do the screening of the tenants. It's just like running a business, right? You got to provide a great product, but you also
Mhm.
have to qualify your leads so you're not burning your time on just people that aren't going to be great customers, right? It's
Right.
just that's just natural course of business. People sometimes confuse real estate investing with like a hobby, but it's really a business. You got to provide a great product, like what you were saying, Matt. It's like you got to put out a home that people are gonna be proud of to be living there. That it's gonna give them dignity for like, hey, this is
Mhm.
my house and I'm really proud of where I live, so that they don't feel less than versus other people. So this is awesome, man. I love the gems that you had, Matt. I'm really interested to hear your perspective. Like, hey, on a larger picture
Mhm.
perspective, why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, is so hard to solve for? And what would you recommend as like some of the actions that this generation can take to
Yeah,
solve
and
that
so
problem?
also, one thing I also want to kind of piggyback on to what Kent was
Yeah.
saying. So, when for the other business owners out there, and we've all heard it, don't use the word quality. It's such a vague term. Like, what the heck does that mean? So the things we say, and again, feel free to steal this for your own marketing. We want to make sure our houses are safe and that are desirable. So those are the two standards we fix everything up to. As for the supply issue, I think one of the, I mean, it depends on the perspective you're coming at it. If you're, let's say you're a developer, I think if you're doing the new build, new construction route, I think one of the issues is really it's just they're not as profitable. I'm just going to say it and say what it is. Like, and it's not like a percentage basis. I mean, even if let's say that even if so, a lot of the home builders report about a 30% ish gross margin. Obviously, and I think somewhere the 10 or 15% net margin. So, I'm you know, so for the new listeners out there, just in case somebody who's not super familiar, doesn't own a business and doesn't know what a gross margin is, it's like, let's say I take this can of Alani. All right, let's say this thing cost me $3 to produce. If I have a 30% gross margin, I'm basically going to charge $4 for this. So that's the easiest way of looking at it. Now, if you look at it as a percentage basis, if you're building a brand new house, you're going to charge $150,000 for, you're probably somewhere in the 110, 120ish range of cost. So you're going to probably make about 20 to 30%, $20,000 to $30,000 of profit. That's pretty sweet. But if you took that same plot of land, the probably a little bit more materials and a little bit more time, but you doubled the size, and now you're charging, let's say, $300,000-$400,000 for that house. Now, I mean, for let's say an extra 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe an extra month of time, and an extra, $10 or $20,000 or $50,000 materials and things like that. Now your profit, if you're still able to maintain that same 30% profit, now your profit is what, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, maybe $100,000 a profit. So I think that's really one of the bigger reasons. If you're going through the hassle of developing land, if you sell a more expensive product, and this is business 101, you sell a more expensive product and you maintain the same margin, you're just going to make more money, So that's one of the big things. And then I think the other thing is too, it's just some of it is inflationary. I mean, it's such a multifaceted problem. It's hard to single out any one particular thing. And some of it is too, people can just command the kind of rents they can. And let's see. People have this notion that you have to fix up the house with to be absolutely like the Class A Taj Mahal. I think that's part of it is too. Like, I'm going to put in, the nicest granite countertops. I'm going to spend, $40,000 on a renovation and make the house like absolute primo, because that's what desirable is. So, finding that happy medium where it's like, does it look nice? And it doesn't have to be imported Italian marble. It could be just, quartz or something else like that from your local, that was found in the local mill. So there are corners. I don't say there's a medium standard you can get to. I think but again, if you can do the Italian marble and you can do the more expensive things, you can charge again a premium. You can make more money, for essentially the same amount of work. So that's part of it. And I think it also can be just, it depends on how far you want to get in the weeds. Because we can even go down into city planning and zoning. If we want to get that far into things, where it's I've been a huge fan of I've been really listening to a lot of not just bikes, There's a couple other urban planning channels where we have like these minimum lot sizes and things like that, where it's like, and also you residential neighborhoods, even though I'm mostly a single family guy, in most places in America, it's illegal to build anything other than a single family house. Okay, well, what if I want to build a duplex? What if I want to build a triplex? What if I want to build a fourplex? So I'm going to give a shout out to, I think it's the Netherlands where this guy's from. They're a lot more flexible. It's like you go down the neighborhood, you'll see some single family, some duplexes, some fourplexes. Like it's a lot more mixture of houses. So they have just more supply. So I think cutting back regulations or zoning requirements, but then you have to get into NIMBYism and things like that. And so that's a big problem. I don't know. My point is it's a very multifaceted problem,
No, seriously. And I think that's why I ask this question to almost every guest that comes on now, because I think everyone brings a slightly different perspective, that's shaped by their background, their experiences, their journey. And this is why I ask all these questions, because the metaphor I use for everybody is like, hey, I think people have told me affordable housing is impossible to solve for, but I disagree. I think it's just a matter of time when you collect all the pieces to the puzzle. And even if we don't collect all the pieces in our lifetime, we pass those pieces on to the next generation, let them figure out. And I think if we can solve some big problems in our lifetime, that's going to make the problem infinitely easier for the next generation to kind of pick that problem up and solve the next tranche of problems, quote unquote.
So okay, I mean, I don't know, Ken, what about you? Like, I maybe I'm looking for a nugget here. I'm your listener. What do you think you've probably talked to far more people than I have. So what are your favorite reasons, and what amalgamations of other people's reasons have you now made into your own reasons for why?
Yeah, so I think for me so far, for what I've listened to so far, is like the number one is lack of supply. So not enough incentives for developers to really take those projects on. And you mentioned that. So I love that. That's a pretty common one that people have brought up. And that's also has to do with the fact that I used to have worked at many organizations where people have been incentivized by incentives, for lack of better words, right? It's like how do you get your sales guys to perform? You give them bonuses. You want developers to build more supply, you got to give them incentives, especially if they're dedicating or setting aside properties for like a set aside requirement where at least a certain amount of units has to be dedicated for people making certain percentages of the average median income. Great. You mentioned zoning, the bureaucracy, like that is a huge part of it, because if you make things difficult, people aren't going to do all the hard work. If you understand human nature, humans are naturally lazy, right? Everything we do is for the conservation of energy. Like there's a reason sometimes our brains zone out and we don't do things, because our brain is trying to conserve energy. That's why when you create habits, you are able to not waste energy doing certain items. And that's why habit stacking is also really cool. But my point for bringing that up is you have to make things easier. You have to make things more incentives. And then on top of that, you have to get over the stigma. And this is one of the biggest problems that I'm trying to solve right now, is like, how do you get the awareness out there right now that most folks in affordable housing are not drug dealers, are not gang members. They are good, hardworking people, just like my mom when she came over from China and she just didn't know English. These are great residents that are there. So if I can just get that stigma over, because I have met many people that says like, oh, affordable housing, Section 8, right? Oh, so they're gonna like wreck the place, right? Like, or chances are higher of them wrecking the place, and that is not true. And I think, Matt, I would eventually love you to share some statistics if you are able to start tracking them on your side as you grow and grow and grow. It's like, hey, what are the percentages of people that trash a place as Section 8 tenants compared to market rate tenants? Because you need numbers to sort of debunk this myth that people in affordable housing are there to wreck your place. And if we're able to get over that fear first, I think that helps us at least shine a light on the next step of this path of solving affordable housing.
Right. Listen to a basic economics course or basic economics class and understand incentives and disincentives, and understand how predictable that is. It makes people they respond to their incentives and disincentives. So again, like re-listen to that clip again and again. Just said that's probably one of the biggest things. That's probably one of the most impactful things that, for me at least, was understanding incentives. Helps you understand human behavior. So that is a huge knowledge bomb. Most people are like, oh yeah, okay, whatever, but that's, again, especially for salespeople. Secondly, the regulation. That is so true. Go anywhere in your neighborhood. I can almost guarantee any single person listening to this podcast, somewhere in your city, you've seen these 501s. These like new apartment buildings that are bottom floor retail, and then like 3 to 4, 5 stories of apartments on top of that. That all became legal, and it's all sudden. It seems like they're suddenly out of nowhere, all because literally one line in some international book of regulation about. I'll try to find the video I actually went into it, not actually what that line is, but basically something along the lines of like they allowed a certain kind of material that like is now that is now fire resistant. Like, okay, this material in this structure has now been allowed to be. It is now fire safe. Okay, so there's really one line in zoning code suddenly now made these buildings possible, and boom, now they're everywhere. I mean, that's how I guarantee no matter where you are in the country, you are seeing these 5/1s because regulations got changed ever so. And the third thing, what was it? Oh yeah, the quality of tenants was, yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you said. I mean, look, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's not possible that some of these people aren't, drug dealers and violent people, but that happens in market tenants too. It's not like, oh, drug dealers are only in area. It's about the more important is about the community. It's about what does the neighborhood allow. And so I got a really, I'm actually working with a local nonprofit. A gentleman's name is Greg. I'm not going to say his last name because I'm not sure he wants me to, for his email to get blown up. But to shout out to Greg. So he used to work for the city, and basically what they would do was, and so they would go around and take abandoned properties and for basically say, hey, look, you're going to fix this. We're going to repossess this property. And we're going to sell it off to back to the community to get it, because it's a blighted property. And so he did this for a long time for the city, but he said the problem was it was shotgun method. So it'd be like one house here, one house over there, one house up there. And he said basically it didn't do anything. So he ended up retiring for the city, started this nonprofit, and now he's like, all right, we picked one neighborhood and we are focused on this entire neighborhood. And they've got the whole thing turned around. They've done about 40 or 50 homes in this neighborhood. And he's telling me this over lunch one day. And that might be the best part. This is the part that really got to me. This is the part I was like, wow, this is incredible. So he was saying how about a year or so into the project, a lot of families started moving to the neighborhood. They had a big soccer field right in them. They put a park in the middle of it. And so a lot of kids were starting to have soccer practice and stuff like that. And he was saying how the coach was walking into the field one night and cars were starting to pull up, and he was like, all right, it's gonna be game night. And he said the local drug dealers were sitting on the schoolhouse steps, kind of just like, hey coach, what's going on? And he was like, there's about to be soccer practice tonight, and there's going to be 100 or so people here, all kids and families all bunch around here. So I don't know what you guys want to do, but there's going to be a lot of people here. And they're kind of like, just kind of shrugged and kind of moved on. And they said he never saw them again because the neighborhood started to turn and became more not even more affluent. It was just rehab. Like instead of just a bunch of blighted properties all over, people just started moving in there, and then the cry basically just left the area. They said, okay, this is no longer a good place for us to do business anymore because there's going to be too many people and it's improving, so we're just going to get out.
That is so
and it's still
cool,
it's all
man.
that it's still, yeah, absolutely. And these houses didn't get turned into McMansions. They're all still lower income housing, but because it's now deemed to be a safe, no longer blighted area, the problems just kind of went away.
And I think people undervalue how important community is because it really takes a whole group of people to take a stand and say, we're gonna make this place better. And that part is really created by the environment that you put in. Where now you put in nice parks, where now you put in nice homes, where people have dignity and pride. And it's like, hey, if someone sees them taking care of their lawn or the front yard on that other house, someone will say like, you know what, let me go do my part and improve the community. People underestimate the impact of the environment and the community that it can have. So Matt, I love that you just shared all those stories because it really solidifies like why we started this podcast and why this stuff is so important for us to talk about, because sharing secrets like this and talking about this openly is what's gonna make the difference, man, in this world and this big problem that we're trying to fight. So Matt, I know we got to wrap up, but Matt, where can people find out more about you or get in touch with you? Because you have just been full of gems today, man.
So reach out to me. My email, we'll probably put in the show notes, but it'll be matt@emeraldcenturycapital.com. And if it's all right and right with you, I'd like to put together a special little downloadable product for all the listeners out there. It'll probably be like, so if you go on our website, you'll probably find like, hey, we got 10 or 20 questions to ask before buying a property. But if it's all right with you, I'd like to prepare a special report That's more like 100 questions. Little extra
Yeah.
nuggets of value for the listeners, people who are just getting started. And I know people are like, oh my God, 101 questions. That's a lot. So take a breath. It's okay. Some of these are repeatable questions you don't have to ask every single time. I mean, it goes into things you don't think about, like, is there rent control in the area? Is the neighborhood area pet friendly, and things like that. So, I'd say about half of these questions are just more repeat questions. Like, once you know the area, you don't have to ask every single time. But again, for newer investors out there who are like me and like, I want to get into it, but I don't have a way to, it's a good way to kind of break down that barrier and like, all right, make sure I'm asking all the questions I need to be asking. So we'll probably put the like emeraldcenturycapital.com / I don't know, affordable housing podcast, or maybe / Kent, or invest with Kent or something like that, because he's the GOAT. Or put, I don't know, whatever the link is, it'll be in the show notes. I'll send it over to Kent. That way people don't have to listen to this. But send me an email and check out the link in the show notes. And whether you're brand new or you're wanting to invest millions of dollars with us, like, reach out and I'll do the best I can to help guide you or put you in that direction, or tell you which podcast you need to listen to by Kent that'll help solve your problems. So.
Oh, dude, I love that, man. Hey, Matt, seriously, thank you for what you do. Seriously, without people like you, I would have never had the home I had growing up too. So seriously, sincerely, thank you. Thank you for what you do. And I can't wait to hear about your fun, your progress, and hopefully we'll get you guys back on the show at some point, man. This is going to be really cool.
Yeah, and thank you for what you're doing. I just want to give a shout out. A lot of listeners, like, not a lot of people are dedicated to this affordable housing space, like, specifically. Again, like, it's about the incentives that Kent was talking about. If you're building an apartment building, why not just do what a bunch of people are doing downtown, where you build these floor to ceiling 14-foot windows, and you can charge $3,000-$4,000 a month of rent for a 1-2-bedroom place. You make more money. So, Kent is really doing a public service by spreading awareness and trying to help change this stigma. So just really honestly, thank you for what you're doing, Kent. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
And people like you are just, helping spread the awareness, because I'm only one person and I can only do so much, but it takes a community. Like you said, it takes a village. So
it does, man. All right. Thank you so much, guys. And Matt, thank you so much. And without further ado, we're out.
Bye, everybody.